Ever feel like there's a tiny, relentless drill sergeant living in your head? You know, the one who's always got something to say. That wasn't good enough. Why did you say that? You'll never get this right. It's like having a personal heckler, except you never invited them to the show. Well, today we're going to figure out why this critic exists, what it actually wants, and most importantly, how we can shift its role from merciless judge to constructive guide. Because let's be honest, self-criticism can be painful. It can feel relentless, like an inner voice that knows exactly how to wound us where it hurts the most. It can wear us down, sap our confidence, and keep us stuck in cycles of self-doubt. But what if we could find a way to understand it, to soften its harshness, and to transform it into something that actually helps rather than harms? Hi, I'm Dr. Stan Steindl, and welcome back to Compassion in a T-shirt, where we explore the science and practice of compassion, how it works, why it matters, and how it can transform our lives. Today, we're diving into the world of self-criticism, but we're not just going to bash the inner critic and tell you to be rid of it. Instead, we're going to take a compassion-focused therapy approach, which means understanding it, working with it, and ultimately soothing it. And trust me, this is important, because left unchecked, that inner critic can keep us stuck in cycles of shame and self-doubt. But with the right tools, we can transform it into something far more useful. So why do we even have an inner critic? It might seem like an unnecessary bully, but in reality, it's an evolved safety strategy. Back in our evolutionary past, humans had to be hyper-aware of threats to survive. That same system now scans for social threats, like rejection, failure, or embarrassment. The critic's job is to keep us in check, making sure we don't mess up and get kicked out of the group. The problem is that it's overactive. And when that critic operates from a place of shame-based self-criticism, it becomes harsh, rigid, and destructive. But there's another way, self-improving self-criticism, where we learn and grow without tearing ourselves down. To understand this more deeply, let's take a closer look at the critic itself. Its main motive is protection. It's trying to keep us from failing, looking foolish, or getting hurt. It often says things like, "You're going to fail. Why aren't you better at this?" Or, "You're such an idiot." These thoughts are driven by feelings of anxiety, pressure, and frustration, and they can manifest physically as tension in the shoulders, a tight jaw, or knots in the stomach. When the critic takes over, we might find ourselves trapped in perfectionism, overworking, avoiding challenges, or even procrastination. Now, let's consider the other side of this dynamic, the criticized self. If the critic is the attacker, the criticized self is the part of us that is under attack. When this part of us is activated, thoughts like, "I'm not good enough, I should just quit," or "I'm a failure," start to dominate. The emotional experience is often one of defeat, shame, and feeling small. Physically, this can feel like a heavy chest or tight throat or low energy. And behaviourally, it can lead to withdrawal, self-sabotage, or people-pleasing. It's important to recognise that within us, both the critic and the criticised can be present simultaneously. We often notice the critic first. It's loud, persistent, and relentless in pointing out what it perceives as our flaws. But what can slip under the radar is where those harsh words land. The criticised self is there, quietly absorbing every blow, feeling the weight of those criticisms. This part needs just as much attention, though perhaps a different kind of attention, as the critic does. Only by acknowledging both can we begin to address the deeper wounds and offer the care that each part truly needs. So where do these patterns come from? In part, they arise from our tricky, evolved brains. Self-criticism is not a flaw in our design, it's a feature. It has deep evolutionary roots designed to help us survive and stay safe within our social groups. Historically, being accepted by the group was a matter of survival, and our brains adapted by developing mechanisms to keep us in check, ensuring we didn't behave in ways that might lead to rejection or exclusion. Self-criticism often arises from the activation of our threat system, the same system that drives our fight, flight, freeze or appease responses. But instead of directing anger and anxiety outward toward an external threat, this system can turn inward. The critic lashes out in an attempt to motivate us to act in socially and relationally acceptable ways, trying to keep us safe through pressure and fear. Beyond that, the critic and the criticised parts of us are shaped by early experiences. Messages from parents, teachers, peers, or society that told us we had to be a certain way to be accepted. These messages weren't always intentional, but they leave an imprint, embedding themselves into the way we think and feel about ourselves. Over time, these early experiences can strengthen the voice of the critic, making it more persistent and harsh, while simultaneously deepening the vulnerability of the criticised self. This dynamic can create a powerful internal struggle where the fear of rejection or failure feeds the critic's intensity, and the criticised self bears the emotional weight of that pressure. Recognising this role of life experience is essential, as it allows us to understand not just where our self-critical tendencies come from, but also why they can feel so overwhelming and difficult to challenge. And here's the shift we need to make. It's not my fault, but it is my responsibility. We didn't choose these patterns. They arise out of our tricky brains, and they're shaped by our experiences. But we can work with them, and that's where the compassionate self comes in. This is the part of us that responds with wisdom, strength, courage, and care. It doesn't silence the critic or ignore the criticised. It listens, understands, and then redirects them towards something actually helpful. When engaging with the critic, the compassionate self might say, "I hear that you're trying to protect me, but we need to find a way to do this that doesn't harm me." And when addressing the criticised self, it might say, "I see you and I know this is painful, but you don't have to stay in this place." The compassionate self also sets boundaries. Just because the critic thinks it's helping doesn't mean it gets free rein to run the show. The compassionate self gently but firmly takes the lead. This is a crucial shift, because when the critic learns that it can be heard and understood without resorting to shame, it starts to soften. Over time, it transforms from a harsh judge into a more constructive, self-improving guide. So what does that transformation actually look like? A healthy, integrated inner critic doesn't disappear. It evolves. Instead of shaming us, it becomes a guide that fosters growth and development while still recognizing our inherent worth. This is where the idea of self-improving self-criticism comes in. An approach that's rooted in compassion, where the goal remains self-betterment, but without the damaging effects of shame. It's about shifting from that relentless drill sergeant we mentioned earlier to something more constructive, a compassionate teacher or coach. This figure still holds us to high standards, still wants us to live according to our values, achieve our goals, and be the best versions of ourselves. But instead of using harshness and fear as motivators, this compassionate inner guide encourages us with warmth, empathy, and affirmation. It genuinely has our best interests at heart, offering guidance in a way that's supportive and uplifting, not punishing. This transformation allows us to pursue growth while feeling safe, valued, and cared for, motivated by compassion rather than fear. And the effect of this shift on the criticised self can be profound. When the critic softens and becomes more constructive, the criticised self no longer has to bear the weight of harsh internal attacks. Instead, it begins to feel validated, understood, and supported. The emotional burden of shame and defeat starts to lift, replaced by a sense of safeness and encouragement. As the compassionate self steps in to nurture and reassure, the criticised self can begin to heal, fostering greater confidence, resilience, and self-worth. This compassionate approach creates a space where growth feels possible, not from fear of failure, but from a genuine desire to thrive and live in alignment with our values. If there's one thing to take away from this, it's that your inner critic is not your enemy, but it also doesn't need to be in control or attacking you at every turn. You have another voice, the compassionate self, and it's stronger than you think. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you noticed your inner critic lately? How do you think your compassionate self might respond? And if you found this helpful, give the video a like and subscribe for more content on compassion-focused therapy and the science and practice of compassion and self-compassion. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.